1,000 days. Can you believe it? That's how long this war has been going on in Ukraine. It's a lot to really grasp, you know?
It is, yeah.
And we're going to try and unpack some of it today using this article, 1,000 Days of War, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom and the World's Future. There's a lot in here. Lot to consider, like just how bad it's been for people, you know, the human cost,
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
it means for like everyone, not just Ukraine. And then, believe it or not, there are actually some hopeful things in here too.
There are. It's a complex situation, but yeah, there are some glimmers of hope. Definitely.
So, ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so this article, it doesn't hold back. Like it talks about how brutal things are, you know, what's actually happening in Ukraine.
Right. Yeah.
And it mentions some cities in particular that have just been devastated.
Yeah, like Mariupol, just, Republic, right? Kharkiv too.
Yeah.
They become like symbols of this destruction, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine. And what really struck me was how many people have had to leave everything behind.
Yeah. The article mentions over 8 million refugees. That's more than some entire countries in Europe.
Yeah, and then there are all the people who had to move but are still within Ukraine.
Right, exactly. Internally displaced.
And it's just a massive number of people.
It's overwhelming to think about, really.
And then there's the article mentions mass graves.
Yeah.
And it's just awful, you know?
It is. It's a stark reminder of what's really happening, how brutal this conflict is. It's not just statistics.
Yeah. And even if someone survives, you know, physically, it's like, what about how they're feeling, you know, their mental health?
Exactly. That's a huge part of it, the psychological toll. Just imagine, like, living under this constant threat,
Right.
never knowing when the next attack might come. That kind of fear, it stays with you.
Yeah. And the article talks about children in these shelters, some of them like separated from their families.
Right, and their education disrupted.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And the article highlights how hard it is to, like, provide support for these kids.
Yeah, you know, the kind of support they need after going through something like that. And it makes you wonder, you know, what does this mean for them in the long run?
Absolutely. These scars, they don't just go away.
Right. And on top of all that, like the article talks about this energy crisis in Ukraine.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know if I can even imagine like what it would be like to live through a Ukrainian winter without heat.
Right. Or electricity or even running water.
And it's happening to a lot of people, right?
It is, especially in areas that have been hit hard by the bombing. The article, it talks about like hospitals struggling to operate,
Oh, what?
families huddled together,
Yeah.
trying to stay warm. It's a whole other level of hardship.
Yeah, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. But even with all this, the article does talk about how resilient Ukrainians are.
Yes, absolutely they are.
And this one part, it really stood out to me. It talks about this teenage boy.
Yeah, he's only 13.
Yeah. He's using AI to create artwork.
Yeah, isn't that
And
incredible?
he's selling it to help his country. It's really incredible.
It is. It's such a powerful example of, even in the darkest of times, people find a way to create, to express themselves.
Yeah, and not just that, to actually help.
Yeah, and it's like this spirit that I think you see throughout the article, this resilience of the Ukrainian people.
It's like they're not giving up.
Exactly, and it takes many forms.
Yeah.
It's not always like these grand gestures.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about getting through the day,
Yeah.
finding those little moments of normalcy, helping each other.
Yeah, exactly. And the article really captures that, but it also makes it very clear that, like, what's happening in Ukraine, it matters for everyone.
That's right. It's a pivotal moment for the world, really.
Yeah.
And the article, it argues that, like, the outcome of this war, it's going to have a huge impact on global security.
Yeah, and like on democracy itself. So why should people care, Even if they're like far away from Ukraine, why should this matter to them?
Well, the article frames it as a fight for freedom,
Mhm.
and it's saying, like, if aggression wins here, if that's allowed to stand, it sets a really dangerous precedent.
Yeah, like what's to stop other countries from doing the same thing?
Exactly. So the stakes are really high here. It's not just about territory. It's about, like, these fundamental principles.
Yeah.
International law, human rights.
Yeah, okay, I see that. So we've got the human cost, the global implications, this incredible resilience, and then the article talks about something called Ukraine Boost.
Right, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? What is it, and how does it fit into all of this?
So Ukraine Boost, it's this initiative, right? And basically they're selling these Christmas-themed products.
Okay. Christmas products.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The designs for these products, they're made by that 13-year-old artist we were talking about.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So it's like supporting Ukraine, but also getting ready for the holidays.
Exactly. And I think it's a smart way to, like, engage people who might not be, thinking about the war all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like a reminder in a way.
Yeah, it brings it into this context, right? Like a personal context, especially during a time of year when people are thinking about giving and generosity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just donating, it's like participating in something.
Right. And I think that's a powerful message.
Okay, but before we go too much further, I think it's a good time to pause and let our listeners kind of process everything we've talked about so far.
That sounds good.
We'll be back in a jiffy to dive into what the article says about what we can all do and what this all means for us.
So we were talking about Ukraine Boost and how it kind of ties the holidays into supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, with those Christmas ornaments and all. It's a pretty cool idea, but the article's not saying that's all we got to do, right?
Right. It goes way beyond just buying stuff.
Yeah.
It's really making the case that helping Ukraine, it means getting involved, like really advocating for things like democracy and international law.
So it's about like speaking up, having these conversations, even if they're hard.
Exactly. And the article talks about like countering all this misinformation that's out there.
Yeah, like really trying to understand what's going on, not just like reading headlines.
Right. Because it's easy to get caught up in all the emotion. But this is a conflict with a really complicated history.
Yeah, and the article's saying like we need to be informed if we're going to form an opinion about it. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about Ukraine itself either. The article really emphasizes how interconnected global security is.
Right, like what happens over there affects us over here.
Exactly. And they're arguing that if we don't do anything, if we don't stand up to aggression, it's just going to embolden other bad actors.
Like it sends the wrong message.
Exactly. So it's not just about Ukraine. It's about drawing a line, upholding international law. The article says that even though it might seem like individual actions don't make a difference,
Yeah.
they really do add up to something bigger.
Okay, so the article mentions donating to organizations that are helping, which makes sense, but how do we know who to trust?
That's a great question. And the article talks about that too. It says we got to do our research, basically.
Like, look into these organizations, see what they're really about.
Exactly. See if they've got a good track record, if they're transparent about where the money goes. And also, it emphasizes supporting groups that are actually led by Ukrainians.
Oh, that makes sense. Like giving Ukrainians the power to decide how the help is used.
Right. But the article is honest. It admits that not everyone agrees with supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, I've heard people say it's like too risky or something. Like it'll make things worse with Russia.
Yeah, and the article addresses that head on. Basically, they say that history shows that giving in to bullies doesn't usually lead to peace.
Like it just encourages them.
Right. So they're arguing for a strong, united response. It's not about blindly taking sides, they say. It's about defending these bigger principles.
Like international law and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sovereignty, human rights, all those things that are really essential for a stable world.
Yeah, okay, I see that. But this isn't a quick fix, right? Like, what does the article say about rebuilding Ukraine, making sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, they talk about the need for huge investments,
Yeah.
like in infrastructure, housing, getting the economy back on track. And that's just the material stuff.
Right. Like, what about the people?
That's a huge part of it, too. The article highlights the trauma people have gone through, both individually and as communities. It's going to take a lot of work to heal from that.
Yeah, and holding people accountable, right? Like, for the things that happen.
Exactly. And they talk about the need for dialogue, for diplomacy, like really getting to the root of why this conflict happened in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense. But it sounds like a lot. Like, I don't know, kind of overwhelming.
It is a huge task. But there is hope. And I think the article does a good job of showing that. It focuses on how strong Ukrainians are, how much people care, and that there are people working toward a better future.
Okay, I like that. We can't lose sight of that.
Definitely not. And even though it's a heavy topic, the article is ultimately about the power of the human spirit.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. But let's pause again here, give everyone a moment to think about all this before we wrap things up. Okay, so we're back. And we've really gone deep on this whole situation in Ukraine.
Yeah, we've talked about how awful it's been for people and, the bigger picture stuff too.
But we also saw how strong Ukrainians are and how people are trying to help.
Right. And now I think it's time to think about, like, what does this mean for us?
Ah.
Like our listeners.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, we want you guys to be able to, like, take something away from this.
Yeah, knowledge is great, but it's what you do with it that matters.
Right. Exactly. And this article, it definitely wants people to do something, but it's not like telling everyone to do the same thing. What stood out to you about that?
I think it's the part about being informed, you know? Like, yes, donate if you can, but also be careful about what you believe.
Yeah, especially online, it's so easy to like just get swept up in whatever you see.
Totally. And this article is saying, like, look, this is complicated. We need to really think critically, do our own research, not just accept what we see on social media.
Yeah, hear different sides of the story, try to understand all the different angles.
Exactly. And that might mean having some uncomfortable conversations or calling out misinformation.
Yeah, and I think it also means recognizing that even small things can make a difference.
Right. Like supporting Ukrainian businesses.
Yeah.
Or amplifying the voices of Ukrainians who are speaking out. Even just talking about it with your friends and family,
Yeah.
in a respectful way.
It all adds up.
It does. And the article is reminding us that this isn't some far-off thing that doesn't affect us. It's all connected. What happens in Ukraine matters for everyone.
Right. It affects global security, democracy as a whole. Like, it's a big deal.
It is. And that brings us to, I think, one of the most important questions the article asks.
Oh, yeah. But
How can we as individuals contribute to a future where peace and freedom actually win?
yeah, that's a good one. What do you think? How do we do that?
I think it starts with, like, really looking at ourselves, at our values.
Like figuring out what we believe in.
Yeah, and then making sure our actions match those beliefs. Like, it's one thing to say we want peace, but what are we actually doing to make that happen?
That's a good point. And I think it also means understanding that piece. It's not just about the fighting stopping.
Right, it's more than that. It's an ongoing thing. It takes work. It takes empathy.
Yeah. And being willing to have those tough conversations, even when it's hard. So much to think about.
There is. But, even with all the heavy stuff we talked about, I really do feel a sense of hope after reading this article.
Me too, actually.
It shows how strong people can be and that there's still good in the world, People who want to help, who believe in making things better.
And I think that's a good place to leave it. This whole deep dive, it's been intense, you know?
It has a lot of darkness, but also those glimmers of hope, like you said.
Exactly. And thank you to all our listeners for sticking with us through it. We hope this has, made you think, maybe challenged some of your ideas, and hopefully given you some hope too.
Yeah. And remember, even though the world can feel really messed up sometimes, each one of us can make a difference.
That's right. Your voice matters, your choices matter, and your actions, they can change things.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep fighting for what you believe in.
Thanks for joining us.